Let's bring in the Daily Caller editor-in-chief, Vince Coglianese. Can we trust a spokesman for the Kremlin, Vince?
That's a great question. I wouldn't, on instinct, trust a spokesman for the Kremlin, but we do have some evidence that people within Clinton's orbit have definitely, I mean, to include Clinton herself, of course, in her job as Secretary of State, communicated with Russians and Russian diplomats. In Hillary's emails, Sid Blumenthal, who's known to be a very close confidant but was kept unofficial within the State Department advisory, communicated with a pro-Putin ally in Georgia and tried to convey his message to Hillary Clinton in the course of her job. So it's not that weird, by the way, for anybody in power in the United States to be communicating with diplomats from any country. Yeah. In fact, it's kind of their responsibility to talk to other countries.
All right, let's go through it. John Podesta, the campaign chairman for Hillary Clinton, did advisory work for an investment bank that is backed by the Kremlin. He got paid tens of thousands of dollars. Russia's news agency TASS, I think you guys are on this story too, is now saying that Tony Podesta, John Podesta's older brother, actually was hired by Russia's biggest bank, it's called Sberbank, to basically lift sanctions that was placed on the Russian financial sector by the Obama administration. So Tony Podesta is doing lobbying work for Russia to get those sanctions lifted off. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, and Sid Blumenthal's son, Max Blumenthal, spoke at a Russian propaganda conference in 2015. So I think there's a lot of evidence here that would preclude the Clinton campaign from giving a blanket denial that anybody within the Clinton orbit was communicating with Russia or Russian diplomats. Of course they were. Somewhere in the line, there are people who were within proximity to Hillary Clinton who were communicating with Russians. So I think for now, the task of Democrats is to try and distance themselves from that as much as possible, because it undermines their central allegation, which is that, that Donald Trump is uniquely compromised by having any communications with Russia in any form.
And, you know, just a footnote, an addendum here. John Podesta got paid tens of thousands of dollars. It looks like Tony Podesta got paid $170,000 by Russia to do that consulting for Russia to get those sanctions lifted, that sanctions put on by the Obama administration. But, you know, Vince, some Democrats, some say the Democrats are still concentrating on trying to tie President Trump to Russia. Basically, they're alleging collusion there. John Clapper, Director of National Intelligence under Obama, says there's no evidence of that. But here's Laura Ingraham on Fox and Friends saying, you know what, no one's paying attention to the accomplishments so far by, that President Trump has achieved. Let's take a listen.
I think they want to dominate the headlines with Russia, 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 because otherwise they're going to have to talk about the stock market, job creation, consumer confidence, overall optimism in the future, business development, manufacturing going up, and the border crossings going down. I mean, that's a bad narrative for the Democrats. It's a good narrative for America, and it's certainly an excellent narrative for Donald Trump.
Is that what's going on here, Vince?
Well, I think if you woke Chuck Schumer up in the dead of night and be like, hey, is Trump being controlled by Putin? He'd probably say no. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I think most Democrats are under the opinion that President Trump is not compromised in the sense that in any way Russia's running the U.S. government. But I do think that they stand to gain something politically from this, which is what Laura was referring to. This notion that they can sort of question his legitimacy to be the president of the United States at all, just by floating this constant association with Russia. They can say, look, he's not legitimate enough for us to even engage him in a policy debate.
But Vince, here's how the media is covering Hillary Clinton's campaign officials meeting with Russia. That includes, again, John Podesta and Tony Podesta. Zero on ABC, NBC, CBS. They're still hot on this story about President Trump's wiretapping claims about President Obama. All three networks devoted time to that, but not to this issue about the Hillary campaign officials working for Russia. Again, John Podesta, his brother Tony Podesta, and others in that campaign talking to Russia. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, the burden of proof when it comes to Democratic wrongdoing is much higher when it comes to the press. They're very suspicious of stories where Democrats are impugned, so they will actually hold their fire much more so than they do with Republicans. A perfect example of this is all of the content that was within those WikiLeaks files that we spent so much time talking about. The press at large pretended like there was nothing but risotto recipes inside of the WikiLeaks files during the election. Once the election concluded and Russian collusion was floated everywhere, then the WikiLeaks files became very important to how the outcome of the election was determined.
Vince Coglianese, always good to see you at Daily Caller. Thanks again for coming on.